Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen of the House. I know that the temperature in here today is a little elevated, and I know that these are issues that are really important, I would say, to all of us in this room. Even though we find ourselves on different sides, they're things that we're very passionate about and we care deeply about. So I'm going to do my best to share my thoughts in a respectful and compassionate manner. But this bill is a repeal of a bill that passed on the 131st. I did serve on the Judiciary Committee the 2 years prior to this one. And we worked the concept of this bill at length, and it was actually introduced by, how I remember, your predecessor from Biddeford, Representative Sheehan, and although I think you were her predecessor before she was your predecessor, but she introduced LD 535, and it was educational for me, and it was kind of eye-opening as far as gender-affirming care, whether the surgical side of it, the hormone replacement therapy. And I tried to dive into the subject matter just to understand how the process worked. And I'm no expert by any means, but I did find that I learned a lot during the process of that debate. And although I did oppose LD 535 in the 131st, it did end up becoming law. And that current law states that a minor, 16 or 17 years old, can receive gender-affirming care without parental consent, and that gender-affirming care being hormone replacement therapy. What we did learn, some of the things we learned in committee last year, is that the effects of HRT, while in some may take longer, the physical effects can be irreversible in just a few months. We heard some pretty heartbreaking stories of detransitioners that came to testify, and I actually had a pretty unique opportunity the night before the public hearing to sit down with a nationally known detransitioner named Rachel Mosley. And I spent about 3 hours with her, me and a couple other colleagues. She had an incredibly powerful and moving story, very real. She's an incredible individual just in general, but her story was very moving. But the detransitioners who spoke to the Judiciary Committee, they were allowed and encouraged to transition in their teens, just to realize that later that they'd made a great mistake. Rachel Mosley, who I just mentioned, shared a heartbreaking story of how she started testosterone at just 17 years old and had a double mastectomy a year later. And in her early 20s, she began detransitioning. She's been quoted to say, "I decided that I didn't want to be a woman before I ever had experience in being a woman. I had no idea what being a woman was like because I was a child. Now I feel like I will never entirely know. I just took the cure that was handed to me," she said through sobs. "I just don't want anyone else to feel this way. I lost my voice. I lost my chest. I don't know if I'm going to be able to have kids. I feel like no one wants to date me or love me because I'm ruined." A quote from the New York Times, she says, "I could go on and on how tremendous the weight is, but what's worse is that it can happen to other people. The pain of imagining that someone else could feel or experience what I'm experiencing makes the pain of being a public case study numb. It doesn't compare. No one came and saved me when I was little. No one told me the truth." The New York Times goes on to say, "Sadly, Mosley knows what the truth is, and it hurts. Her body has been ravaged. She says her liver is big, her insulin is high, her uterus, bladder, and vagina have atrophied." Now, I understand that this is just a story of one detransitioner, one brave enough to step forward and share the intimate details of her physical health, a bravery that many of us in this room would be too ashamed to share. And while I recognize that this may not be the path for every person struggling with gender dysphoria, I also recognize that gender dysphoria is legitimate and a very real struggle for a rising number of youth in our state. The feelings of anxiety, the feelings of internal disunity, and at face value, my vote on these issues don't entirely tell the whole story. don't really tell a story of the true love and compassion that I have for people in that community, or the true love and compassion that I have, especially for young people who are struggling, not just in this manner, but in struggling in general. But Mr. Speaker, love and compassion is truth. I told a story earlier this week on how I got a chance to run through mud puddles with my little niece. Well, we were next to the main road right there in Mexico, Maine, and I held her hand. I didn't hold her hand because I hated her. I held her hand because I loved her, and I didn't want her to run into traffic. We don't tell our kids that they can or can't do things because we hate them or because we're scared of them. We set boundaries for them because we love them. And the love and the truth that I have for these young people who are struggling with this is what forces me to stand and rise today and say that there is another option. And right now, to allow 16 and 17-year-olds without any guidance to just go and do things that are going to permanently change their lives, like what we just heard from Prisha Mosley, who she began her own transition at 17. And then just a few years later realized, what have I done? But her body's permanently changed. The good part of the story is she just went on last year and she did have a child. She gave birth. But I would strongly encourage members of this body to go read that article that I quoted from the New York Times that talked about the physical agony that she went through because her hips had narrowed, her body wasn't fit to carry a child, that she lays her healthy son on her chest and she doesn't feel anything because her skin is numb, that her milk is coming in, but her milk has become hard rocks on her chest that are incredibly painful because there's no nipple there for the milk to come out of. We have young people in our state who are struggling, they're in anguish, they're hurting, they're broken internally. And we need to make sure that we're pointing them in the right direction so they're not making these life-altering decisions that permanently change them. I'm not saying this because I hate them or I'm transphobic. I'm saying this because I love them. I don't want them to scar themselves and change themselves and mar themselves and rob themselves of a perfectly healthy sex life or a marriage or a family or children. And this is a real reality. I had a lot more to say, and I think I said more than I intended. I guess that's what happens when your heart takes over, but I will say that there have been many sentiments shared in this last week about the brain development of young people and how they don't make decisions. They don't make the best decisions when they're younger. And I will quote one thing. This was a quote that was made by a representative that actually introduced the bill, LD 1113, an act regarding fairness in sentencing for persons under 26 years of age. And that representative quoted, "The transformative potential of young people is undeniable. Given that their brains are still developing, they are capable of profound positive change and can overcome their past actions to lead healthy, productive lives. Other states have led the way in this area. That's in reflection to the criminal record side of things. And I know that many of the sentiments that representative gave in introducing 1113, LD 1113 in the Judiciary Committee have been echoed in this chamber. And I would just urge colleagues, although I hate the term urge my colleagues, I would urge my colleagues to stay true to logical consistency, and please vote down this measure.